Our exhortation this morning is being delivered to us by Brother John Horton, and his subject for his talk is Benaiah. And in preparation for his remarks, he has asked that we read 1 Chronicles chapter 12. First Chronicles chapter 12, beginning in the first verse. Now these are they that came to David to Ziklag, while he yet kept himself close because of Saul the son of Kish, and they were among the mighty men, helpers of the war. They were armed with bows and could use both the right hand and the left in hurling stones and shooting arrows out of a bow, even of Saul's brethren of Benjamin. The chief was Ahiezer, then Joash, the sons of Shema the Gibeathite, and Jeziel and Pelet, the sons of Asmaveth, and Berekah and Jehu, the Antothite. And Ishmaiah the Gibeonite, a mighty man among the 30, and over the 30, and Jeremiah, and Jehaziel, and Johanan, and Josabad, the Gederathite, Eluzai, and Jeremoth, and Baaliah, and Shemariah, and Shephatiah, and Huraphite, Elkanah, and Josiah, and Azareel, and Joazer, and Jeshabeam, and the Korhites, and Joelah, and Zebediah, the sons of Jehoram of Gedor. And of the Gadites, there separated themselves unto David into the hold to the wilderness men of might and men of war fit for the battle, that could handle shield and buckler, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and were as swift as the roes upon the mountains. Ezer the first, Obadiah the second, Eliab the third, Mishmannah the fourth, Jeremiah the fifth, Attaiah the sixth, Eliel the seventh, Johanan the eighth, Elzabad the ninth, Jeremiah the 10th, Maccabeani the 11th. These were the sons of Gad, captains of the host. One of the least was over 100, and the greatest over 1,000. These are they that went over Jordan in the first month, when it had overflown all his banks. And they put to flight all of them of the valleys, both toward the east and toward the west. And there came of the children of Benjamin and Judah to the hold unto David. And David went out to meet them, and answered and said unto them, If ye be come peaceably unto me to help me, mine heart shall be knit unto you. But if ye be come to betray me to mine enemies, seeing there is no wrong in mine hands, the God of our fathers look thereon and rebuke it. Then the Spirit came upon Amasiah, who was chief of the captains, and he said, Thine are we, David, and on thy side, thou son of Jesse. Peace, peace be unto thee, and peace be to thine helpers, for thy God helpeth thee. Then David received them, and made them captains of the band. And there fell some of Manasseh to David, when he came with the Philistines against Saul to battle. But they helped them not, for the lords of the Philistines upon advisement sent him away, saying, He will fall to his master Saul to the jeopardy of our heads. As he went to Ziklag, there fell to him of Manasseh Adnah and Jozabad and Jedielel and Michael and Josabad and Elihu and Zilthai, captains of the thousands that were of Manasseh. And they helped David against the band of the rovers, for they were all mighty men of valor, and were captains in the host. For at that time, day by day, there came to David to help him until it was a great host, like the host of God. And these are the numbers of the bands that were ready armed to the war, and came to David to Hebron, to turn the kingdom of Saul to him, according to the word of the Lord. The children of Judah that bear shield and spear were 6,800, ready armed to the war. Of the children of Simeon, mighty men of valor for the war, 7,100. Of the children of Levi, 4,600. And Jehoiada was the leader of the Aaronites, and with him were 3,700. And Zadok, a young man mighty of valor, and of his father's house, 22 captains. And of the children of Benjamin, the kindred of Saul, 3,000. For hitherto the greatest part of them had kept the ward of the house of Saul. And of the children of Ephraim, 20,800, mighty men of valor, famous throughout the house of their fathers. And of the half-tribe of Manasseh, 18,000, which were expressed by name to come and make David king. And of the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do, the heads of them were 200, and all their brethren were at their commandment. Of Zebulun, such as went forth to battle, expert in war, with all instruments of war, 50,000, which could keep rank. They were not of double heart. And of Naphtali, 1,000 captains, and with them shield and spear, 37,000. And of the Danites, expert in war, 28,600. And of Asher, such as went forth to battle, expert in war, 40,000. And on the other side of Jordan, of the Reubenites and the Gadites and of the half-tribe of Manasseh, with all manner of instruments of war for the battle, 120,000. All these men of war that could keep rank came with a perfect heart to Hebron to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one heart to make David king. And there they were with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their brethren had prepared for them. Moreover, they that were nigh unto them, even unto Issachar and Zebulun and Naphtali, brought bread on asses and on camels and on mules and on oxen, and meat, meal, cakes of figs, and bunches of raisins and wine and oil, and oxen and sheep abundantly, for there was joy in Israel. Let's now give our attention to Brother John on his topic, Benaiah.
Good morning. I just wanted to start this talk by sharing with you that maybe other brothers have similar challenges, but there are times when in my life I have felt exceedingly unworthy to be standing up here trying to tell anybody anything that could possibly, be of value. With all the wonderful, learned people that we have here in our midst, and often with these challenges and struggles, you just, at least I didn't feel very worthy to be here. In fact, the last time I was on to speak, I had a conversation with Brother David, and I asked David, I said, I just really don't think there's anything that I could say. And he thankfully took my spot. He wouldn't do it this time, though. So, so here I stand before you. So there are times, certainly in my life, where I do need inspiration. I do need encouragement, I guess, as we all do. And this recently has certainly been one of those times in my life. And this is a man that I found great encouragement from, because this man is a man that we read incredible things of. We read things of such magnitude that sometimes they're dismissed. They can be dismissed as simply, that's just another example of what a fairy tale the Bible actually is. There's no way these things could happen, but they did. And so I'd like to take just a few moments here this morning and talk about this man, Benaiah, because he is an incredible and sterling example of steadfastness, of commitment, and of, as we just read in that account of these great men that were assembled to David, they were men. They were truly, truly men. Men not because of anything that they intrinsically possessed, but because they were willing to make a stand for the Lord. They were willing to do that which was right and needed and necessary for the Lord. And they were assembled from all parts of this land of Israel. And they came to David, and as maybe you heard in the reading, it said that they were men of one heart. They were men that didn't break rank. They were men that were completely committed to the task at hand, which was fighting for the Lord, fighting for the anointed king, and carrying out God's will. And Benaiah is listed as one of the chief men among these men. There were 30 men, as we'll see later on, that were special and listed as David's mighty men, and he was amongst the top of those men. And certainly listed in the chapter that we just read, there were thousands of men of great, great stature in the Lord for their commitment and their willingness to serve and put themselves in harm's way for the Lord. And in many cases that we see from this man, Benaiah, being in harm's way for the Lord does not necessarily mean that we're going to be harmed. Sometimes we find out wonderful things about ourselves when we put ourselves in what we perceive as harm's way. Well, this man, Benaiah, who was he? Well, when a lot of people think of this man, I hope you can see that, this is what they think of. Does anyone know what that is referring to? David does? Anyone else? Well, this man is listed as a man, and this is where people think it may be embellished or a fairy tale. This man killed a lion with his own hands. He killed a lion. And he did it in the most adverse of situations, as we're going to see a little bit later. But he did it in a time of winter, a time of death, a time when there was snow listed as being on the ground, a time of unsure footing. And he did it on the lion's term. The lion was actually cornered. He was trapped. He was in a pit. And he leapt into the pit and killed the lion. Some other people that may know a little bit more about him may think of this when they think of this man, Benaiah. Another incredible story. He killed two men also of war, of great stature, probably two of his equals. He killed them in battle. These were men of, they're listed as men of Ariel, or as lion-like men. That were fierce men and trained in this warfare. And we mentioned briefly in our opening of Sunday school this morning that when we think of warfare, it's very easy for us to just gloss over it when we're talking about the ancient world. But warfare was completely different than warfare today. When we say these were men, they were absolutely men who were skilled in fighting hand to hand, because that's what fighting was. With the exception of arrows that were mentioned in our reading, they could launch from a distance. The fighting was grueling, and it was bloody, and this was a world bathed in blood. And they didn't have the medicine that we have today, so many of these wounds were life-changing, if not life-ending. And this was the world that this man excelled in. Well, this is just a little, what we call a stat sheet. So his name is Benaiah. His hometown is listed as a place called Kabzeel. We're going to get to that next, because I think that's very important in understanding this man, because that shaped who he was. Kabzeel was a border town, and it's certainly in the ancient world, certainly in the world of today, certainly in the history of this nation and in Canada and other places, border-lying areas were very dangerous places to live. And this is what shaped this man. He was from this town called Kabzeel. He was the son of a man named Jehoiada, as we're going to read later on, who was not only a warrior himself, but he was also a priest. And it's significant. It says his position was one of warriors. And here's just some highlights that we're going to get into. He's one of David's 30 mighty men, as referenced in 2 Samuel 23, verse 20. He was a general of David's 3rd division, and that's from 1 Chronicles 27:5. He was a commander, and this is important. We're going to talk a little bit more about what was involved in this as we progress. But he was a commander of David's special forces, and they were indeed that. They were David's special forces, and they had 2 components. He killed 2 champions of Moab, as we saw in the last slide. And it's important to note that these were champions. These were warriors. These were people that were the elite of the elite, and he killed not 1 but 2 of them, maybe at the same time. And that's taken from 2 Samuel 23, verse 20. He killed a lion in a pit on a snowy day, taken from the same verse. And he also, a few verses down, killed an Egyptian warrior who's listed as a giant. And we'll talk about the significance of that. Well, in terms of where he came from, if you can see this map, if you see Judah and you see where Edom is on the border of this and then Moab a little higher north, well, he came from the very border of Judah and Moab. And as we mentioned, this was a border area. It was a very dangerous place for someone to grow up. And it's thought that this shaped him as a warrior because from his youth, he would have been, and they started young, they started marrying young, and they started having children young, and they certainly started being warriors at young ages in the ancient world. And Israel was no different. It was of necessity that they had to do this. They grew up very quickly. And from his youth, he was probably involved in a lot of fighting. And this shaped who he was. So we're going to just, I guess, briefly talk about some of his accomplishments, some of his feats, some of his acts of service. And I maybe have these out of order. I'm just going to skip through some of these and come back because I think it's probably, we don't know for sure, but the indication is that he probably, the feats of him fighting a lion and fighting lion-like men and fighting giants was probably before he was vested. It was that's probably what led to him having a pedigree that David saw and trusted. So we're going to skip there first. Okay. He was a killer of lion-like men, and this is referenced in the same verse, of lion-like men and an actual cornered lion. And he did so in the snow. And we're just going to read 1 Chronicles 11:22. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. Also, he went down and slew a lion in a pit in a snowy day. And in 2 Samuel, a parallel account, 2 Samuel 23, verse 20. And Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and again, the son of a valiant man. So this is his heritage. His grandfather was also a valiant man, and it's stated here in 2 different places. Of Kabzeel, who had done many acts, he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab, and he went down also and slew a lion in the midst of a pit in time of snow. So I guess we need to ask ourselves, why would, and we talked about this in our Sunday school class downstairs. We looked at Isaiah and we saw that the creator of the universe views this world as simply a speck. To him, that's really what it's like. He says so in Isaiah. But yet, he's taken an interest in each one of us. And yet, he has decided that we need to know these facts. That those who would follow him through his guidebook, scripture, would need to know that this man did these things. Why would we need to know that this man went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion? Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think probably first and foremost, it foreshadows Christ. It foreshadows our Messiah. It foreshadows the work that he did and that we remember in this table before us. It foreshadows the fact that he went to where sin dwelt, that had the power of death. And he defeated sin where it dwelt. And a pit, we think of a pit. A pit is symbolic of the grave. A pit is symbolic of a lot of things in our life. It can be symbolic of depression. It could be symbolic of being stuck in a rut, not going forward, not advancing, being someplace that isn't good and stuck there. And how appropriate that this is the terms on which this man did this incredible act. But if we think about this and this situation, this is real. This really happened. So what was a lion doing in proximity to this man? We can assume that it was proximity to other people as well. And if it's a pit, it was probably a cistern or maybe a well or something that was used to collect water. And this, for whatever reason, this lion was in this pit, and it was winter. It was a time of death, a time of snow. And he saw fit to go in and take care of the situation, to kill this lion. I mean, I guess he could have used a bow and tried to kill it from afar, or even a spear, but he jumped into this pit and vanquished this lion. And this is recorded in many places for us to reference. But he also killed lion-like enemies of Israel. He killed lion-like men, these men of Moab. And as referred to our map, Moab was very close to where he grew up. It's probably likely that he had experienced fighting Moabites from his youth, and he was up to the task. But he was a man who did these actual things. These are not fairy tales, these are not stories, and this is left on record for our benefit. He was also the killer of a giant. And when we think about the responsibility that he was later vested with by David, think about David's pedigree. David also killed a giant. David also killed a lion. David killed a bear. I would venture that David saw in this man much of himself. And as we read this in 1 Chronicles 11:23, and he slew an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits high. That's roughly 7 feet high. And in the Egyptian's hand was a spear like a weaver's beam. Well, a weaver's beam is a huge thing. And to hold it, much less wield it, is a testament to this man's size and strength. And it says again, he went to him. He went down to him, but all he had was a staff or a club. But what he ended up doing was very similar to what David did. And he plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his own spear. Again, he's going to where, if we think of Egypt, we think of them being delivered from Egypt, and Egypt being historically symbolic of a place of sin. He's going down to where the sin resides and killing sin with its own weapon. And indeed, we think of what that foreshadows. So these are acts that are listed of this man. And because of that, he was given charge of David's guard. And in 2 Samuel 23, verses 22 and 23, these things did Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, and had the name among 3 mighty men. He was more honorable than the 30, but attained not to the first 3. And David set him over his guard. So because of his faithfulness, because of his willingness to act, because of his willingness to put himself in harm's way for others and for the Lord, David recognized something special in this man, and he rewarded him with responsibility. Well, this is what his responsibility was. He was given charge of two special groups of people. And in 2 Samuel 8:18, we see, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over both the Cherethites and the Pelethites. And David's son were chief rulers. Well, who are these people? Well, the Cherethites are executioners. And biblical scholars, here's a definition, and we're not going to look up all these references, but certainly write them down and look them up on your own. There were executioners and there were King David. And we see the references. And it's plain that these royal guards were employed as executioners. Also, more towards the next group, as couriers. But if they had been conjectured, but it has been conjectured that they may have been foreign mercenaries and therefore probably Philistines, of which the name Pelethite may be only another form. So these were people that were brought into the fold. Our brother Ian several weeks ago talked about how historically people were brought into the nation of Israel. And here's an example of David. David says, I love your law is my meditation. And under the law, these people could be incorporated into Israel. And in this case, it's thought that they were maybe Philistines. And certainly, if anybody would have a relationship, be it good or bad, with the Philistines, you would think David would certainly be one of those people. Well, that's the Cherethites. Their special job was the job of executioners. And then the Pelethites, they were messengers. Mentioned always along with the Cherethites, and only in the time of David, the word probably means runners or couriers. And made to note that while forming part of David's bodyguard, they were also sometimes employed as couriers. And if we think about David early on, before he became king, he relied on a lot of information just to stay alive. He had to have word of what Saul was doing, where his armies were, so that he could take action first and not be caught. And it's just interesting to note that here's this man who's been anointed, and he is immediately a fugitive. So these people were very important to him. It says, some, however, think that these are names simply of two Philistine tribes, which David selected his bodyguard. They're mentioned along with the Gittites also, another body of foreign troops whom David gathered around him. So these are the people that were brought into the fold, and they had to be led by somebody. And David saw fit to give this charge to Benaiah. He was a man of war. He was a warrior, obviously, but he was also of a warrior in priestly lineage. And we think about how this beautifully represents Christ, and how Christ was and will be both of these things. In 1 Chronicles 27:5-6, the third captain of the host for the third month was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, a chief priest. And in his course were 20 and 4,000. This is that Benaiah, who was mighty among the 30 and above the 30, and in his course was Amizabad, his son. So he was a warrior, and he was given, under David, he was given a rotational charge along with his duties of leading the special forces. He was given the third month as acting captain of David's army. And we mentioned earlier, we didn't really dwell on it, but in his lineage is also his grandfather. And we're not told much about him other than both in Samuel and Chronicles, he's listed as a valiant man of Kabzeel. So it's worthy of note that in a world full of valiant people at this time in Israel's history, he was listed as a valiant man, and he was the grandfather of this man, Benaiah. And we mentioned these feats that he had done. Well, because of his faithfulness through David's entire reign, he is given a very special job. When David is on his deathbed and he's ready to pass, he calls three people. And if you can't see this too well, I'll just read it for us. And this is David, and this is who he calls. And it says, "And King David said, 'Call me Zadok the prince, and Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada.'" So he calls three people. He calls the priest, he calls the prophet, and then he calls the man of war, the man he's entrusted with his own personal safety, the man who led his bodyguard. And they came before the king, and the king said unto them, take with you the servants of your Lord, and cause Solomon my son to ride upon mine own mule, and bring him down to Gihon. And let Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet anoint him their king over Israel. And bow ye with the trumpet, and say, God save King Solomon. Then ye shall come up after him, and he shall come up and sit upon my throne, and shall be king in my stead. And I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and over Judah. And Benaiah the son of Jehoiada answered the king and said, Amen. The Lord God of my Lord the king say so too. As the Lord hath been my Lord, Lord the king, even so will he be with Solomon, and make his throne greater than the throne of my Lord King David. So Benaiah saw this. He saw that David was old and that the time had come for the transition of the king. And he had been called as one of the 3 special people that were going to be there for Solomon's coronation. And he said, yes, Lord, I will do this, and I will do everything in my power to make his kingdom greater than yours. Well, in so doing, he continued in his role, and he became a killer of any threats to Solomon's throne. We read in 1 Kings chapter 2, first in verses 24 and 25. Now therefore, as the Lord liveth, which hath established me and set me on the throne of David my father, who hath made me an house, as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death on this day. And King Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he fell on him that he died. So you can imagine that this is a man that's gone through David's entire reign and executed a faithful job, and he's doing this now for Solomon, but he's still actively involved. He did this with his own hands. He could have at this point been to the place of maybe retirement where he could get someone else to do it, but he did it himself. He didn't make any excuses that he was too old or maybe not having the same resolve to do these things. He did it with his own hands, and he acted swiftly and faithfully. And that's just one threat. If we go down further, if we go down to verse 34. So Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up, and he fell upon him, and the him is Joab. And if we think who Joab was the leader of the army when he was the leader of David's special forces. This is the man that David had entrusted, who later turned on David and was later trying to usurp authority that was not his, and was in opposition to the Lord when he had been a tool of the Lord for so long, who this man would have known well. And yet he went and took this in his own hand. He didn't pass this responsibility to anyone else. He did this himself. And it says, and he slew him, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness. So he was again faithful, and he stayed faithful, and he didn't make any excuses. He carried out these things himself because he had promised to do so. He had promised the Lord, and he had promised David that he would do so. And then further down, we see Shimei. Well, if we know his history, he was disrespectful to David, and we can only assume that going forward he was also to Solomon and was at odds with him. So this is what happened with him in the same chapter down in verse 46. So the king commanded Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, which went out and fell upon him, that he died, and the kingdom was established in the hand of Solomon. So he was still a tool. He was still active. He was still useful. He was still not shirking any of his responsibility. Well, because of this, he was ultimately elevated. And I guess that's a lesson for all of us, that his faithful service led in being elevated in this life, and I'm sure in the life to come. But he was elevated finally to the leader of the Lord's army, the entire army. And this is taken from 1 Kings 2, verse 35. And the king put Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, in his room over the host. So that's over the Lord's entire army, over all of them. He was the general in charge. And then down in chapter 4, verse 4, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the host, and Zadok and Abiathar were the priests. So what can we take away from this? Here's this man, and it's really been nothing more than just a very brief character study of this man, this incredible man. Well, what I take away from this, and why it gave me a boost and a lift, is that this is a man, one of the few people that we read about in Scripture, that we read nothing. I'm sure he was human, and he was made of the same flesh as we all are, but we don't read of any acts of swerving or of faltering or of being unsure. He was a man that was a man of purpose. He was a man of the Lord. He was a man of service. And in nothing that we read do we see any example of him, while he certainly may have been entitled, having any pride in all of these great acts. We don't see him, he must have. I mean, just the act of what he did with that lion. People would have spoke of that all of their lives. It would have turned into lore. He would have been a man of just incredible aura, and certainly had the opportunity to gloat, certainly had the opportunity to relish in his own acts. But he realized that it wasn't his glory, it was God's glory. And we see a man of faithfulness, a man that lived his entire life through 2 kings and was still useful and still had a purpose. And we see a type of Christ in his actions, in his victories for the Lord, because he's a man of deliverance. He's a man that delivered safety, he delivered loyalty, and he delivered to God's anointed 2 times personal safety. And brothers and sisters and young people and friends, this is also our calling in a very different way. We are to be protectors and defenders of what we know to be truth. We're to spread that. We're to do so in a loyal, in a committed fashion, and we're not to waver. Thank you.